Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the Halftime Talk feature interview series. I'm delighted today to be joined by Mr. Arsenio Domínguez, who is the Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization, otherwise known as the IMO. Secretary General, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure being with you here.
Well, it's great to have you, and very opportune, obviously, because the shipping and maritime sector in general is obviously having a very dynamic period, as it generally does, but even more so in the last couple of years, and really very specifically over the last few months. From a sort of safety and security point of view, if we put aside the sort of geopolitics and just talk about safety, security, which of course the IMO is it's one of its remits. How much of a challenge has that been for your organization? Has it been a distraction? What do you see as the main sort of choke points potentially as we move forward?
Yes, IMO was born to address safety. So it's important to remember that, especially when our agenda and our work related to the environment normally is the one that take the headlines. It doesn't mean that we don't continue to focus as well and enhance safety in the international shipping. The industry is resilient. You mentioned the numbers about trade by international shipping. And of course, it was greatly demonstrated during the COVID pandemic. But it is true that the geopolitical situations right now are increasingly putting barriers or more challenges beyond the climate change issues that we've been dealing with in the last few years. However, we continue to sit down on the table, speak, and bring all the parties together in order to find solutions. We don't have solutions to the roots of the geopolitical causes, but we do focus in providing assistance to ship owners, ship operators, member states, and in order for trade to continue to flow as it should, because it is detrimental and unjustified what is happening to ships, and in particularly the negative effect that it has on seafarers, who are the innocent workers on board the vessels. But I wouldn't say that it actually has stopped the work of IMO. It hasn't stopped the way that shipping continues to trade. It has provided the industry yet another opportunity to adapt and to continue to supply the necessary goods to everyone around the world. We have made several announcements, and the organization, the member states, have also adopted resolutions in order to enhance communications among themselves, as well as with all the players, all the stakeholders, in order to share the experiences, find solutions, carry out the required analysis and impact assessment of whether a ship should sail through a particular region or not. But what we have to highlight is, of course, that the freedom of navigation needs to be respected, and that's why we continue to operate around the globe, of course, always taking into account the necessary precautions.
If this dark fleet is not tracked officially, and we have incidences, insurance companies aren't, the insurance companies that are involved are not plugged into the approved official international insurance system. How much of a concern is that from a spillage point of view? For example, if we were to see, unfortunately, a disaster of a spill, and it's something that is not officially on the books, is that something that concerns the IMO? Is it something that members are talking about, that sort of unlikely incident, and how much of a concern is that?
We're always on the alert. And of course, that's why our regulatory process continues to evolve on all the aspects, from liability to safety, security, and the environment. You very clearly highlighted how the effect on shipping has several ramifications that goes beyond just the operation of a ship and the people that is on board the vessels. You include the insurance market, and of course, prices around the world will continue to increase for as long as the situation is as it currently stands. And then it's the end consumers that also will receive the negative effect. When it comes to the dark and shadow fleet, the organization adopted a resolution at its previous assembly in December in order to highlight the importance of full compliance with the IMO regulations. And this is what is not new for us. For me, this is substandard shipping. And it's ships that, regardless of the flag, they need to comply with all the safety measures, the training requirements, as well as the controlled on discharges or pollution to the environment. Now, IMO has a very well-established program in order to support countries, in particularly developing countries, to implement the regulations. And this is what we continue to do. It is on the agenda of all the safety and environmental meetings, how to enhance the implementation of the instruments and how to increase the appropriate compliance of these instruments, because that's how we will eradicate substandard shipping. When it comes to sanctions, of course, that's beyond the remit of IMO. And will only follow sanctions that are applied by the Security Council. In this case, that is not the situation, but we are aware of the challenges that the geopolitical scenarios out there are increasing in shipping, and that's why we took the actions of recommendations, in particular on ship-to-ship transfer operations, and to carry out all the necessary procedures that are already embedded in the IMO guidelines in order to avoid any disasters. We're also very well prepared with a network on oil pollution response into how to support member states in the case that an incident takes place in order to limit any negative impact on the environment.
Okay, yeah, but I mean, absolutely. And you know, while those sanctions, as you said, aren't within your remit, what is within the IMO's remit is the targets. Let's talk about the environment now and the measures that the initiatives that are being taken continuously and of course being added to as the years go by. One is that shippers need to reduce their CO2 emissions by at least 50% by 2050 compared to 2008 levels. That's still a realistic one, do you think? Is that achievable? You know, what's been the progress so far, and are the stakeholders aligned on reaching those targets?
Yes, I'm very optimistic with the process, and all stakeholders are aligned, and that was very well proven last year when we adopted the 2023 GHG strategy here at IMO. And of course, this is a transition, so it's not going to happen overnight. And I know you're saying that we're halfway through there, but for me, you know, we still have over 25 years to actually get to that level. The reality is that we are progressing on all the technical measures and the economic measures that are going to support this transition. There are several operational measures that have been implemented already. That comes from the Energy Design Existing Ships Index, the carbon intensity indicators, and low-hanging fruit practices that ship operators and ship owners can put in place in order to increase the efficiency of the vessels. That will take us to the first checkpoint as we have in 2030, as the new and alternative fuels as well as the new technologies will continue to evolve, will continue to be introduced in the market. And of course, we continue as well to develop any safety guidance that is required and training for the new alternative fuels as well as the new technologies.
And I mean,
on track.
Yeah, and on the alternative fuels, but even on reducing, as you said, the CO2 emissions, the sulfur content. I remember the IMO 2020 a few years ago, ahead of that, was being talked about as a very tall order, but actually was quite a successful by all intents and purposes. And the conversations we used to have with shippers, with ports, with the various stakeholders was that everyone was in agreement about the target, but enforcement was a bit, you know, uncertain. And also the investment that shippers make, let's say, towards those reductions were a little bit hesitant in certain cases because these directives are changing year by year, aren't they? I mean, you know, you reduce sulfur to 3.5 and then the next time it should be 2.5. Do you think there's enough clarity of a through line for shippers who are reinvesting in new ships or repurposing old ones on that front from organizations like the IMO in terms of the trajectory of new fuels and what their vessels need to be ready for?
The fact that we continue to address all these challenges and the way that we are progressing with the negotiations in a very inclusive manner with all the stakeholders, including the representatives from the different sectors within the shipping, demonstrate not only the commitment, but the fact that whenever there's an additional clarification or additional guidance, IMO is ready to work on it. As you said, IMO 2020 was very successful, and there's always going to be a concern from some parts of the sector when it comes to the time to provide the full implementation. And again, that's why we have a very good program in supporting member states for the implementation, as well as the verification of the implementation of this instrument. And that's what we're doing right now. We provided the clarity through the IMO 2023 GHG strategy in what are the clear checkpoints, as well as the objective of decarbonizing by around 2050. We are in the process of developing the technical and economic measures. And of course, we also evaluating the life cycle assessments of all the alternative fuels that possibly be part of this process and this transition, again, in order to provide that incentive, that clarity. And we are looking into the early movers, and I will continue to call on those that can take the first steps to actually do so, because that experience and expertise will always be positive for us to continue to evolve in our regulatory process.
Are there any new tools on energy efficiency that are out there that you think are not being adopted enough in terms of solutions of energy efficiency on the water?
There are practices. It's not necessarily the technologies only, but the practices into, even reducing and changing the light and going into LED on board a vessel. Immediately you will start enhancing the efficiency. And this is what we are promoting, that those very low-hanging fruits can be introduced, can be implemented by the ship owners and ship operators in order to immediately gain. And that also going to be an economic gain, because of course, by enhancing the efficiency, you reduce the operative costs. Technologies and fuels, what we have done and decided at the organization is to be agnostic. So we're not going to limit it in all the options that will be there. The technology continues to evolve. Some of them are already in place, but are not scalable. Wind has become one of the main ones, and we've seen how many more ships are now moving towards wind, because the increase in efficiency sometimes goes over 50%, which makes sense for the operators. And of course, they're carrying out the analysis on the routes, trading, etc. There's a lot more information and communications that we're carrying out for analysis with other agencies like the World Meteorological Organizations, not only on the safety aspects, but the more that we use digitalization and information and data, the planning routes can actually increase and improve in a way that ships will become more and more efficient. So the several aspects that we are working on and promoting that can bring a lot of efficiency and allow us to meet the deadlines before we rely only on the new alternative fuels, because that is not the case. The fuels will provide us, the necessary means to achieve the later goals, but there's a lot that we can do without them right now.
The global north-south divide and the geopolitics, new routes for shipping being talked about, from going around Norway, Finland, etc., to Asia, rather than the usual, through the sort of Suez, etc., or in either direction. Is that anything that features in the IMO's thinking or planning in terms of what that might mean for your regulations and for your stakeholders?
It's not our decision in relation to the routes. And of course, it is important for shipping to also evolve and adapt and be prepared for anything that it needs to face in the future. And what we focus at IMO is, as long as those routes, and for as long as those routes continue to open out and maybe new, for us it's important that the regulatory process, that the systems that we have in place continues to address any areas relating to safety and protection of the environment, that our rules will actually be fit for purpose wherever the ships are operating. And that's the main principle. From then onwards, of course, we follow some of the environmental actions that have been put in place, such as the Green Maritime corridors, that are actually going to provide information, very relevant information on these trading routes, whether they are established ones or new ones, in relation to safety, navigation, communications, as well as protection of the environment. And for the time that we continue to get these routes being established, which of course was born at the UNFCCC, the COP in Glasgow, but the organization continues to look at them as means for the shipping route, not only to improve, but also to learn from it.
Okay, and I mean, you mentioned COP because I wanted to ask you about that. Obviously, we had COP28 here in the UAE, where I am, a year ago almost. And of course, we have the one coming up now this year. I mean, what was your main takeaway from the UAE COP in terms of any new direction for the energy sector, but of course, shipping within that, and any sort of things on the wish list for the next COP, which you think would have to be emphasized a bit more for progress on that front?
In relation to our work, the main outcome at the UAE COP last year was the decision to transition away from fossil fuels. Because, of course, that goes hand in hand with the outcome of the decisions at IMO in adopting the strategy and establishing the goal and the objective to decarbonize the industry by around 2050. My wish list, if we put it in the way that you phrase the question, is that we continue those negotiations at the next UNFCCC. So action starts to be taken into what the countries, particularly from the energy sector, are doing, because we will be transporting those new alternative fuels, new sources of new renewable energies, but we also need to be consumers. And it's also the recognitions from the different parties, all the governments, that shipping needs to be high in agenda when they develop the strategies in relation to renewable energies and transitioning away from fossil fuels. So those are the main aspects that I will be looking at for COP to continue to keep on the agenda and to discuss.
We see the new fuels and all that agenda being developed very fast, and a lot of options out there. Are we seeing the manufacturing investors keeping up with that new fuel, greener outlook, if you like, going forward? Or is there still some resistance to sort of continuing to use traditional fuels?
There are two things there. One is, you're right, the fuels continue to develop very quickly, but they're not scale up at the level that they can supply the required amount of fuels to the shipping industry. So saying that the fuels are ready, it's probably not the right statement right now, because we also need to address the safety aspects of these new fuels. We have to train the people on board to handle those fuels in a different way. It's not as cargo, but it's now as a propulsion fuel. So this is where I continue to express the reference to a transition. At the same time, because those fuels are not scaled up right now, the economies of scales are different, and we need to take that into account. It's part of the analysis that we're carrying out at IMO right now in the negotiations for the technical as well as the economic measures and how we can support this transition within the industry. But what is true is that if we look at the most recent United Nations Trade and Development Organization's report, there is an increase of the orders for new ships with the alternative engines, which means that they will be able to handle dual fuels, in particular focusing on the new fuels. So the transition is in its way. The stakeholders, ship owners and ship operators, are taking the next steps. But of course, we still need to continue to work, in particular with the energy sector, to have the reassurance of when those new fuels will be scaled up in order to have a full and appropriate transition.
And do you think that hydrogen could be really viably one of those new shipping fuels?
Hydrogen-derived fuels continues to be also one of the main ones right now on the table for research and development. So it's not off the table. There's a lot more focus on ammonia probably at this stage, as well as methanol and ethanol. But when we are carrying out the analysis of the life cycle assessments of the fuels, we're actually not excluding any of them.
Mr. Arsenio Domínguez, Secretary General of the IMO, thank you so much today for joining us on Halftime Talk.
It's been my pleasure.